next have a panel discussion on cloud and AI transformation in the Asia Pacific. I would like to introduce Kat Wang, Manager of AWS Trade and Supply Chain Policy at Amazon. She'll be our moderator for this next session. Please join me in welcoming Kat and the panelists to the stage. Kat.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kat Wang with Amazon, and I have the honor of moderating this distinguished panel before me today. Hans Sirpan with the Embassy of the Philippines, Rob Tanner with USTR, Hubert Han with the Embassy of Singapore, and Shay Wester with Asia Society. The topic we have before us today is cloud and AI transformation in Asia Pacific, an incredibly timely topic. As there's no question currently that we're in the midst of one of the most consequential technology transformation in our history, especially with AI. I saw it written recently that AI may be comparable in terms of impact to electricity, but the difference is that electricity took about 40 years for us to realize its impact, and AI seems to be moving about 10 times faster. Asia Pacific is certainly one of those regions that is recognizing this and undergoing a transformation very rapidly. Just to set the scene a little bit, Hans, I'll go to you with the first question. As we've often heard, AI is described as a force multiplier in terms of economic growth. In the Asia Pacific context, can you comment a bit? Where do you see the most immediate and transformative benefits when it comes to AI adoption, particularly with respect to sectors?
Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation to be able to share with you our insights on this very important and timely topic. Well, as you've said, AI is largely considered to be it's as consequential and as revolutionary a development as electricity is, and it's often described as a very revolutionary force multiplier. The IMF has described its economic impact, potential economic impact, to as big as about 1% of GDP of the region, and potentially could grow to about $3 billion by 2030. So in the Asia Pacific and in the Philippines in particular, we've seen a lot of potential for AI to help economies in the region take advantage of the potential productivity gains, and help economies leapfrog. For example, in the sphere of healthcare, for countries like the Philippines, which is, we're an archipelago, and access to healthcare would have some physical limits, especially in remote areas. The pandemic has highlighted, for example, the advantages that telemedicine can bring, and digital healthcare has helped bring access to those who need it most. And we've seen potential uses of AI in diagnostics, for example. The World Health Organization, with the Philippine Department of Health and the United States, they piloted a program in the Philippines for tuberculosis screening. And they were able to use portable X-rays and computer-aided software and imaging, and they used AI to help reach more accurate diagnosis, and this was achieved with the use of community health workers. So So these are, I think, concrete examples of how um, digital transformation can significantly impact the lives of real people.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
those are some great examples, Hans, super helpful. Um, from my end, I think one of the things that I do observe is that despite the strong momentum within the Asia Pacific to adopt and utilize AI, we do see a number of economies and governments that still erect regulatory barriers that prevent a lot of this adoption from taking place. Obviously from where I stand, a lot of it, what I see is in particular with respect to cloud adoption, which is often talked about as a foundational technology for AI. So we observe a lot of data localization requirements still, cybersecurity concerns. Hubert and Rob, I'd love to go to you both on this. Why do you think some of these regulatory barriers continue to exist despite the momentum for AI adoption? And how can we get governments sort of comfortable with removing some of these barriers?
We sort of out-pollited each other there, so I'll go first. Thank you, Kat, and thanks, Christy, for having this panel. Yeah, I think AI is one of those topics where it feels both overwhelming and then sort of you drill down, you wonder if you're missing everything. We actually had a sort of mini event on the side of the APEC Business Advisory Council last month. It was focused on AI, and I think part of that was a discussion about sort of best practices in the enabling environment for AI, which is really dependent on cloud services, on electricity, on all those sort of inputs to the semiconductors and the semiconductors themselves before we even get to the stuff on top, the models and the applications and et cetera. I mean, I think, cloud is a key part of that stack and, you know, continuing to see the kind of issues that we've dealt with on the trade side for quite some time now, which is sort of fundamentally allowing for cloud service providers to compete fairly. Historically, that was a bit more just letting them in the door, and now we're sort of seeing, the challenge of putting barriers in sort of in the way, whether it's in the form of localization or standards or other technical requirements that have precluded the ability of global cloud service providers to provide those services in different economies in the Asia Pacific has been a challenge, and I think AI sort of turbocharges that. AI, I think it's pretty clear the sort of level of activity, sort of any layer of AI, is just exponential increase in demand. And so, I think at least in terms of what we have been seeing in our bilateral engagement in the region is the need to sort of continually to focus on making sure that we're not seeing new efforts, whether it's through the sort of the lens of the sovereignty or sort of other technical standards. We do see still efforts to impose things like physical separation of facilities, which does radically change the economics for providing cloud service. And so, why do we see that? I mean, I think there are different motivations. I mean, obviously there are different things that different economies are trying to achieve, whether it's sort of thinking about, where they fall in the value chain and sort of what their domestic competitors might or could be. We often see a lot of challenges in the government procurement side of things where governments are increasingly moving to take advantage of the benefits of cloud, particularly with AI coming down the pike, where I think there's this, a general recognition that you have to move to that in order to be able to benefit from the benefits of AI. And so a lot of that is an education process. Government, I'm part of the government. It's, we try to be fast and make smart decisions, but sometimes that is a process. So I think that's a lot of what we're seeing. Why don't I let you have a chance? Please go ahead.
Well, first of all, thanks for the invitation this morning. I should start off by saying that I think we're all in agreement that certain localization or infrastructure requirements are necessary, and not everything should be seen as a barrier. We fully hear industry's point that clear, feasible, sensible regulation often is a lot better than no regulation at all, which just gives rise to a lot of uncertainty. I'll try to answer both your questions. Why do these barriers exist, and what could we do to try to overcome them? With a suggestion, which is based on our experience in Singapore. A lot of the time, the public sector of government's interaction with industry tends to be on the basis of individual regulations or pieces of legislation. Obviously, that's very important. But my pitch here is actually that a lot of this, or some of this, is actually already predetermined by national strategies. One of the things that I've seen a bit less of is the interaction between government and industry in the formulation of, for example, national AI strategies. In part, maybe because that is a response to a certain trigger. In 2023, 2024, there was a huge amount of impetus for countries to put out national AI strategies. And the extent of consultation there, perhaps there could have been a bit more. Why I'm trying to emphasize the importance of trying to convince and influence national strategies is pretty simple. In a space like AI, where its prospects rise more on any given day, it's important to anchor countries on exactly what they mean when they think about AI. What is your national ambition? And what do you hope to achieve with it? If your national ambition, for example, is to be a data inference hub, because it makes sense for your country, it doesn't quite make sense for governments then to put in place very onerous data localization requests. If what you mean by being a data center hub is being able to attract best-in-class hyperscalers, then it'll make it very challenging for governments to be able to put in place cybersecurity standards that are wildly divergent from international norms. And so drilling down, when you think about a national strategy, what it means to be, for example, a data center hub, and to go that one level deeper, is actually incredibly important from a bureaucrat's point of view, in order to determine what sorts of policies will come 2 or 3 years down the road, even as AI obviously evolves. But if you're clear about what you hope to achieve as a country, in consultation with the private sector at whatever point in time you're writing the strategy, actually it helps to anchor you a great deal. What we're trying to avoid here is really that you're finding the wrong tool to tackle the problem. In AI, so much of the time, and cloud adoption, so much of the time we find that you're using a sledgehammer to nail a photo frame nail into the wall. And that just doesn't make sense. How do you try to break that cycle? Engaging on the strategies upstream, I think is pretty useful.
I really liked both of those answers, and just the advice that you gave on sort of the arguments that might resonate with foreign governments, especially for all of us industry in the room who frequently has to talk to them. Rob, what you said about education, and Hubert, what you said about kind of linking it to the government and the national goals of the government are both super helpful. I'd love to shift a little bit to kind of contextualizing some of this, the impacts of some of these regulatory barriers. Shay, I know you've done a lot of work on this in your research. Can you talk a little bit about how this regulatory fragmentation that we see in the region, and how different standards that we see in the region, how does it actually impact the ability of Asia Pacific markets to deploy AI solutions at scale?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. And good morning. Great to be here. So I really appreciated hearing Hans speak about how much is happening with AI across Asia. That said, I think from a policy standpoint, that regulatory fragmentation is really the biggest practical break right now on AI deployment in the region. And the gap between AI ambitions and AI scale is increasingly this regulatory gap more than a technical one. I think the critical question when we step back is how do we get this right? Perhaps by looking at what can we learn from some of the digital transformation successes, but also failures that a lot of people in this room have been involved with for the past 20 plus years. And now we have AI. Now, what makes that particularly different? I think it's important to note that AI workloads depend on scalable cloud and secure cloud infrastructure. The cloud market in the Asia Pacific is projected to be over $500 billion in 2028. And I think, as many people know, there's just an enormous build out as well of digital infrastructure taking place across the region. So economies that modernize their cloud governance now are going to be in a stronger position to compete. And Rob and Hubert talked all about some of the digital trade barriers that I think makes these challenges really apparent. I think three reasons that this all hits AI specifically. So AI adoption is fundamentally cross-border. Things like training, data, inference, model updates all have to move across jurisdictions to work. And so localization just makes that economically unworkable in most cases. Inconsistent security baselines force cloud providers to maintain duplicative certifications. And then finally, the absence of harmonized standards can mean that AI products built for one economy often can't be deployed to the one just next door in a straightforward way. Now, the fix here really is not deregulation. I think the smart approach is looking at risk-based frameworks that can align with international standards, mutual recognition of comparable certifications, looking at instruments like the cross-border privacy rules. And then I'd point to a couple of examples. Singapore's multi-tiered cloud security standard and the US FedRAMP are both examples that show that you can achieve some genuine security assurance without really duplicative or overly onerous compliance regimes. And I think Hubert's point about public-private cooperation is key here. I was actually in Singapore and involved in some of the consultation from the industry perspective when the cloud security standard was being adopted. There were concerns at that time. I remember companies being concerned about this, but there was a very productive exchange, public-private, which I think made it something that is now being seen as a success. So, I just conclude by saying that I think APEC, ASEAN, and other groups like that can play a really important role here as well to foster some of the international cooperation that's essential to combat the fragmentation.
Thank you for that. I'd love to now hear kind of from each of the governments, from you all highlighting sort of a little bit of the work that you're all doing on this front. I'm actually going to go to Rob first. We've been negotiating, or U.S. government has been negotiating a number of reciprocal trade agreements, arts, trade deals, what have you, this past year. Can you talk a little bit about USTR using digital trade rules to advance AI competitiveness and talk a little bit about how that may or may not potentially have fostered collaboration with our partners in Asia Pacific?
That's a great question. So a couple things I think that are probably worth starting with. I mean, one, there is a tremendous whole of government approach in the U.S. That really the State Department, with a lot of help from OSTP, has been playing a big role in. So, we are focused on accelerating the continued evolution and deployment of, we basically American AI stack. And so that, again, just going back, that's all the way from, sort of focusing on critical minerals to the semiconductors, et cetera. So we're at the Coalition for Services Industry event, so I'll focus on some of the things that we're specifically doing at USTR. We are, as I said, I think there is a big effort in trying to make sure that we have a competitive access and supply of critical minerals, particularly, sort of processing that. But at the sort of services level, I mean, we've been, as you said, deeply busy, involved in a large number of negotiations over the last, like we're coming up on 16 months now, so almost a year and a half. We've had talks with, I would say, almost every significant economy around the world. We've reached a number of agreements. I think, as everybody probably knows, they're posting sort of finalized reciprocal trade agreements on the USTR website. And we've in all of those, we've been very focused on sort of what we think of as digital trade issues. So ensuring that there are commitments to ensure data flows, to not discriminate against digital services and products, protections for source code and proprietary knowledge have sort of all been part of every effort we've made in all of those negotiations. We've also had quite a lot of success in dealing with very specific issues in a number of countries, including particularly restrictions that sort of may emerge in terms of countries' approach to privacy. I think the U.S. does everything it can to work with other countries. We're not trying to cripple efforts to protect data or privacy, but rather I think it's sort of an effort to make sure that other countries fully understand the U.S. system. There are quite a lot of mechanisms in the U.S., even though we don't have a completely harmonized system between sort of sector protections and state law. The U.S. actually, I think, does quite a good job of providing protection to privacy. So maybe that's a longer answer than needed, but we've been very, very busy with that. I think in terms of that piece of the puzzle, what we're trying to do is make sure that we work with all of the countries that we've been engaged with, and continue to engage with more countries this year, that we see commitments to data flows, that we see commitments on sort of the government procurement side, that they are, making that transition in a way that allows U.S. companies to compete. And I think what that will help with, as we see our part in the larger U.S. government effort, is that by ensuring that the markets are sort of open to digital trade and that the rules are sort of set for fair and reciprocal competition, that as AI service providers, continue to compete, and particularly in the application side, that they will have that level playing field and that they'll be able to, deliver those services without sort of unnecessary or discriminatory restrictions.
Yeah, great. And Hubert, looking to you, the opportunity that I see with Singapore and in the Southeast Asia region, that's most immediately is probably your ASEAN chairmanship in 2027. Can you talk a little bit about the concrete steps you guys are thinking about, with that particular, with taking up that particular mantle, and what you're thinking about doing in terms of digital fragmentation across Southeast Asia?
Yeah, of course. And just to mention that a lot of this work that we'll do in 2027 will build on the good work that our ASEAN partners have had over the past few years. This year the Philippines has chaired. They've got a focus on SME growth, bridging the AI literacy gap. These are really important. The starting point for us is that we think that Southeast Asia is really uniquely placed to take advantage of this moment in AI, right? We're the fastest growing digital economy region in the world. Public trust in AI is double that of the West. The number of times that Minister Yeo just now mentioned Southeast Asia, ASEAN, Singapore, within his remarks, I think goes to show the keenness as governments for us to come together to set the rules of the road when it comes to cloud, AI, related technologies. I will make a plug upfront as well that next year is our ASEAN chairmanship. It's also the 50th anniversary of ASEAN-US Dialogue Partnership. And that's a really unique opportunity for us to think about how we can profile how this partnership has helped both sides over the past 50 years, not just in terms of government-to-government relations, but obviously the US private sector as well. I can't give too much away because a lot of this is still being cooked, but I'll mention 2 points, right, in relation to ASEAN and our priorities next year. The first is really, it wouldn't surprise any of you, but deepening cross-border efforts when it comes to AI, when it comes to data. Shay was talking about data flows as it's related to inference for models and things like that. We think actually in terms of the more traditional cross-border data flow regime, it's actually high time that a bit more attention was paid to it. And we think within ASEAN, we would be able to get somewhere when it comes to an agreement, when it comes to cross-border data flows. This would be an improvement on what we already have today. The second aspect is really in terms of capability building. I like how Director Kratsios describes this in terms of sovereignty. It's not about full self-sufficiency, but about having some level of strategic autonomy, insofar as having the ability to use the best-in-class technology to achieve your own national objectives, whatever those might be. And we think that in Southeast Asia, that's a really interesting proposition where you can marry this access to best-in-class technology along with the ability to really move your entire economy across sectors, not just your financial, healthcare, not just the sectors that you would traditionally think of as being ripe for AI innovation, but actually the entire economy. When you think about what I call the lumbering giants like manufacturing, those have a huge potential there when you think about how AI could transform some of their workloads. And so at the ASEAN level, what could we do in order to improve some of that in terms of cross-border, as well as bringing along our entire economy, small and medium enterprises, manufacturing sectors, and things like that. So those are the two areas that we would likely be focusing on next year. And we would obviously welcome US private sector involvement, dialogues. If there's anything that we can do, 50th anniversary, we'll be very keen to explore some of that.
Very helpful. Well, I got the 5-minute warning about 4.5 minutes ago, so I think I'm just going to go to the last question, which actually is for you, Hans. Would love to hear about the Philippines and your all's experience. One thing that stands out in my mind is how your government has been moving very quickly in terms of digital government and cloud-enabled services. Can you just give us one or two of the key lessons that you would want to share potentially with other governments in the region regarding that particular journey?
Well, I think for us, for the Philippines, digital transformation has to be predicated on massive investments in digital infrastructure. Bridging that infrastructure gap is key, and ensuring that connectivity is a reality for everyone. In an archipelago like the Philippines, physical connectivity presents a real problem. And we have invested in building a digital backbone. We've utilized multilateral assistance from the World Bank and other partners to build this digital backbone. We have also utilized satellite technologies also to go to that last mile for internet connectivity, because for us, which was brought to the fore during the pandemic, when schools had to transition online, connectivity is key. And for us to be able to bridge the digital divide, not just within the Philippines, but in the region, across the region in ASEAN, there has to be a consolidated and coordinated effort to build the infrastructure, because without that infrastructure, digitalization and AI will not progress. So some efforts that the Philippines has done, we have done a cloud-first policy since 2017, and we've created a department on information technology and information communications technology department, dedicated department which would have a single lead agency which would help synchronize efforts across different hundreds of national and local government agencies when we talk about procurement of ICT needs, ICT budgets. We have also been developing a e-government super app. It's called egov.ph, where the principle is we are trying to bring government services, have what's called a once only principle, where you input things hopefully only one time, and that the data can be shared across different government agencies and services, which would help facilitate, for example, permits and access of other government services. So I think also what is crucial to what Hubert also said and other panelists have said is public-private partnerships. That has been key. The Philippine government has been working with the private sector in establishing cloud centers of excellence. So we have done that with a number of US companies. And we think that this is a path forward for many economies, for many countries, for their digital transformation.
Great, great. Well, I know we've only begun to scratch the surface here today. With the discussion we had just now. But thank you all for being here. Let's continue the dialogue.